Making radio-controlled airplanes out of foam board is a technique that's been around for years. It's a hobby that has a huge community around it. After diving into the amazing Flite YouTube channel, I decided to take a shot at building my own RC plane. A good way to start is to use existing plans to build your plane. However, being as vain as I am, I decided to design my own airplane from scratch. To do this, I followed the workflow that I'm used to. I designed a 3D CAD model of my plane first, and then exported it to reality later. I largely based my design off of the Flite Test Simple Cup, which is an excellent starter plane. I'm actually quite content with how the CAD model turned out. I used parametric design, which means that the model is driven by a bunch of formulas and numbers in an Excel sheet. If I want to change, let's say, the wingspan of my plane, all I have to do is enter the desired length into this sheet. Doing this will automatically change the model, including all the dependent geometries and features. I can do the same thing with the angle of attack, tail taper angle, and many other parameters. For the wing, I downloaded a flat-bottomed profile from airfoiltools.com and created an offset that represents the foam board being bent over the profile. Something that sets my design apart from most common foam board planes is that I use 3D printing quite a lot. This makes designing much easier, but comes with some downsides too. The motor hub, for instance, is 3D printed to provide a sturdy base for the propeller, as well as to support the fuselage. After having finished the model, I used the Inventor Unwrap tool to convert the bent structures to flat, 2D shapes. Using AutoCAD, I arranged the pieces the way I wanted, and then printed them out on multiple sheets of paper to use as a cutting guide. To align the many sheets, I used a glass pane from my 3D printer and my phone flashlight to create a makeshift light box. Then it was time to take up the sword, or X-Acto knife, I guess. Cutting into this foam was both satisfying and anxiety-inducing. I had some tricky cuts to make, especially around the hinges. A big part of making these planes is to not fully cut through the foam board so that you can bend parts on themselves. After adding some makeshift spacers and my 3D printed motor hub, I used hot glue to put the fuselage together. Next up is the wing. To build up the wing, I first had to make a bevel cut on the foam board to allow it to bend. Unlike the guys at Flite Test, who make a perfect smooth cut in one go, my bevel cut was not very pretty. Nevertheless, using some 3D printed ribs and a pair of extra hands to hold everything down, I managed to make the two wing halves. Afterwards, I glued them together. Additionally, I applied a dihedral angle to the wings to improve stability. Next up are the vertical and horizontal stabilizers. These also incorporate flaps to allow for pitch and yaw control of the plane. Before fitting all the electronics, I decided to throw the plane to test how it behaves. Apart from being very tail heavy due to the absence of the battery, the plane seemed to have at least some tendency to fly. After checking the center of gravity, as well as checking the flaps, it was time for the maiden flight. Some of my family members were watching and filming, and needless to say, my stress levels were really high. I had a bad feeling since the plane weighed in at around 800 grams, almost twice as heavy as planes of the same size. I was sure this thing would instantly crash. After roughly 20 hours of building, that wasn't a very happy prospect. Nonetheless, I faced my own fears and tried to defy gravity.
Lukt ook mee.
Holy shit! Is jij goed? Oh, de wind. Oh, de wind.
Pas op voor de draden.
In de wind gaan. Holy shit! Oh nee, de wind, de wind.
This was honestly a surreal feeling. Even though in university I had learned about the physics and the formulas that keep planes afloat, I just couldn't imagine that this heap of foam could actually fly. But seeing something that you designed and built from scratch taking flight feels amazing. My extreme reaction during the Maiden flight
Holy shit!
became a bit of a meme among my family. So much so that my father, who's a musician, decided to make a remix of it. I present to you, Holy Shit.
Holy shit! Holy shit!
If you look carefully, you'll notice that I didn't have the softest landing. It was quite a windy day, and I got hit by a crosswind that whipped around my plane. A more experienced pilot might have recovered, but even the RC simulators couldn't prepare me for this. Naturally, I tried a second flight. This time, I couldn't get to a stabilized flight like before. It's pretty cool to see how I managed to save the plane from a near crash during takeoff. This is mainly due to the ground effect, which is a phenomenon that causes planes to generate more lift when close to the ground. Like before though, the wind spun my plane around almost 180 degrees. It looks like the plane is slightly tail heavy too, although I'm not sure that wasn't just me panicking, pitching up, trying to get altitude. Unfortunately, I never actually got this plane to fly again. It sustained some damage after the first few flight attempts, mainly broken 3D prints. Even after printing them again with stronger materials and reinforced designs, I couldn't get the plane airborne. I'm quite sure that my first flight was a fluke, and that the plane is actually way too heavy. My theory is that it needs to fly quite fast to generate enough lift to be able to carry the weight of the plane. During the Maiden flight, I think I tossed the plane at the perfect speed and angle to take flight. I think maybe adding a landing gear to the plane so that it can take off from the ground would help a lot. However, the terrain was extremely rough, featuring many grass patches that would flip my plane instantly. After a few more attempts, I got tired of spending an entire day fixing the plane and then crashing it 5 seconds after takeoff. I accepted that, for all its beauty, the plane had some major flaws. Nonetheless, I call this project a success. I had tons of fun playing around with a foam board, and that Maiden flight is something I'll never forget. If you feel like doing something like this, I highly encourage you to download plans from Flite Test, or even buy one of their kits. It's way easier, and the results will be much better. I doubt that this will be my last RC plane project, but for now, I'll stick to building stuff that actually stays on the ground.